the darkest nights, we find our light. Battered souls, but we won't lose sight. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial we carry on. Surviving together, never alone. Through every trial we carry on. Surviving together, we stand tall. United forever. Strength and courage will overcome. Oh, surviving together, victorious, and never, never alone. Hand in hand, we'll face the unknown.
We see you, we hear you, and we believe you.
Hey, everyone. How you doing tonight? Just realized, was I wearing the same shirt? I think I was in that last frame that I am now. Well, you can tell it's one of my favorites. Anyway, you guys have landed Surviving Together. It's a safe space for trauma survivors to come together, connect, build community on their healing journeys, as well as providing trauma-related education for all. And that is certainly what we're going to be doing tonight. But before we delve into that, I want to say, hey, Carmel, thanks for wrenching tonight. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. And he is welcoming our guest tonight, which I guess I should have put that up in a second. But before we start, before I bring our guest up today, I do want to send hugs and love out to both two members of our community, Misha and Crystal. Misha, I got this wrong. I thought it was this past week. It was the week before. But in case you all missed it, I don't know how you could have, because I was the one living under a rock. But the trial for the murderer of her daughter, he was found guilty. That's why I'm not saying alleged murderer. So we are extremely thrilled about that. And Crystal, who had a major medical procedure done on Monday, came through it with flying colors, sent home later that day. So she's healing well. We're just crossing our fingers, for any infection, normal follow-up type things when you have a major procedure done. So everybody's doing fairly well, all things considered. So I just wanted to send that out into the world. Hey, Body, how you doing? So without further ado, though, I am going to bring up our guest today, Louie Greek. Hi, Louie. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here. I have been looking forward to this conversation. For all of you who don't know, I'm going to let Louie really introduce himself, but he is with an organization called TAT, Truckers Against Trafficking, and we're going to get into that later on. So what I will have Louie do, if you would, is just, introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, if you feel comfortable with it, and just kind of give a little bit of your background, how you got into human trafficking to start with, because I know you didn't start with TAT.
Yeah, so how I got into human trafficking was a little bit by accident, and has changed my life in the course of my career. I started my career out in the military fairly young, joining as a teenager, and then through that kind of joined law enforcement. I went to school for forensic anthropology, and really kind of pursued a career in wanting to kind of work crime scene investigations, major investigations. Really had not heard about human trafficking at all. It was not discussed in my police academy. While I was in the military, I did a little over 19 years in the military. We really didn't talk about human trafficking at all. And so,
what years are you talking about then? When you say we weren't talking about it, what decades are you talking about then?
Yeah, so 90s, early 2000s, and I think people that are probably watching and listening could probably identify and realize that I feel like it's only been the last maybe 10, 15 years that we've really been using that term and talking about that. And as we kind of talk about my role in the transportation and
Mm-hmm.
energy industry, I think human trafficking's definitely always existed in that industry. I think we just had a normalized belief around it. I think we just saw that that's part of the industry. And so I think now that we're starting to recognize what this crime really looks like, who's really being victimized and harmed, and really hearing their story, hearing from survivors of human trafficking, and really
Mm-hmm.
believing them that this does occur. And so yeah, I feel like in my early career, it wasn't just something that was talked about. It wasn't something that
Yeah.
law enforcement agencies were really focusing on. I do see a change these days, but again, I felt like it was something that I had no idea that really existed. And I would say, despite my time in the first 10, 15 years of my career and in law enforcement as well as in the military, I was kind of going out about my business, just really focusing on that sector of where I was working in law enforcement. Until one day, I think it was about 2013, we had a local nonprofit come to our agency and talk about the issue of human trafficking, and I was shocked. They really focused on how this issue was happening overseas, not so much here in the United States at that time. But again, I was, for someone who had a passion of serving,
Mm-hmm.
serving community, serving people, serving marginalized individuals. I thought, wow, I was all in. How can I help? What can I do with my
Yeah.
skill set and background to make a difference in this? And I guess, to further explain, a lot of my work was really dealing with death investigation. And so the work that I dealt with, and those that are typically harmed in regards to the cycle of death, I didn't see a whole lot of victimization in there. I looked at it from a
Mm.
forensic lens. But when I heard about human trafficking and realizing that, there's individuals that are still experiencing this exploitation, it's growing.
Yeah.
How can I use some of that training and skill sets from my previous career to assist those that are experiencing that exploitation, and really trying to put a stop to this crime? What can I do? Who can I join? And so, yeah, I joined an organization about, gosh, now going on almost 13, 14 years ago. And so I left my law enforcement career. I quit my nice cushy job, and I volunteered with a nonprofit organization to assist in combating human trafficking, primarily in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. And what I really did was just kind of working on best practices, intelligence gathering, seeing how I can partner with local law enforcement, U.S. law enforcement in some of these host nations like Thailand, where oftentimes, I think either due to funding, equipment, maybe education, there's been, sometimes there's a gap there in combating human trafficking. And I feel like many people sometimes travel to those locations like Thailand to engage in sometimes commercial sex. And so,
Yeah.
where can, individuals like myself coming from Western countries, European countries, North America, go and assist some of those host nation law enforcement and trying to combat those that are either live there or travel there to participate in this crime. And so spent a number of years, gathering intelligence, working and training host nation law enforcement, learning a lot of myself about this issue, and really trying to see if we can help liberate some of those that are experiencing exploitation in Southeast Asia.
Two things. One, I want to say kudos to you and whoever, you were with, who focusing on training the people who are living there, right? This is something that we've been speaking to more and more people about in their different niches of what they're doing, is when they're going in and working with the host nations about actually helping them with what they're doing, you know, with everybody that they've got there. Sorry, I was going to speak about something, then I realized, oh no, they're not going to be on till next month. So I was going to tell you a whole story about something. I'm like, no, shoot, none of you guys have heard about it yet. Hi, Tiff, how you doing? Um, but I think that's so important, right? Especially especially I think, being sensitive coming from Western nations and not wanting to be seen as, oh, we're just coming here to fix your problem because we
Mhm.
know all. So if we partner with them and say, listen, we've got some information, you guys haven't really dealt with this on this scale or whatever, let us give you whatever tools we have. Take what you need, what works for you, what works for your culture, and let us know how we can be of service. So one, just thank you for taking that tact. I think it's just really important, and I wish some more organizations would kind of focus that way. I want to ask you about your understanding of human trafficking when you were introduced to this. I've got like four questions that are all like overlapping in my brain, right? I mean, was there an aha moment for you? I know that a lot of people, say, listen, once you've had your eyes open to this, you could never close them again because you see what you see now. But, you know, what did you come to understand about trafficking, like, say in general or, specific to the Southeast Asia, to the area that you were working with?
Yeah, there was definitely a aha moment of just realizing that, as I was getting to understand human trafficking and realizing that, well, this isn't just something that's new. It's kind of always existed. I just feel like that we've now come on to a bit of a. Now hopefully, it's not a trend, but we're starting to realize that this isn't, what we were looking at before. When we looked at someone and said, okay, well, that's prostitution, and we need to arrest that person for soliciting sex. Whereas now looking at this, and
Yeah.
understanding the story behind it, that there's usually a third party, a trafficker or a pimp, controlling that individual, forcing that individual. There's vulnerabilities that go behind. There's a lot more. It's a lot more complicated in regards to how that individual got into that situation, and then also from the perspective of demand, which I'll definitely talk about and highlight. Who's the parties that are actually creating the demand for these individuals to be exploited. And so I think the aha moment was just realizing, I'm like, how am I hearing this for the first time? And
Yeah.
how is there not more people and individuals and agencies really focusing on that? And I think that's really what really got me there is the aha moment of, well, there just needs to be more resources, efforts, and individuals, at combating this. Really now, as there's been more statistics gathered, as there's been more focus on that, we now
Hmm.
know this is one of the, I think, the second most profitable crime out there.
Yeah.
As we look at crime statistics, and so for someone who kind of really devotes their career and time to helping people, especially on crime prevention, and now looking at this as like, well, this is really an area that definitely needs a lot more attention and focus on there. And how can we do that? How can we come together and collaborate and do that? And really kind of realizing, I think at that time I was fairly new and maybe a little naive on just how widespread this crime is, what it looks like in
Yes.
different areas and different sectors, kind of like the organization I work with now in transportation and logistics
Hmm.
industry. And so I really, again, I think that was kind of the wow, this is happening. And at that time, you know, I was more from the lens of hearing how this is happening overseas. That it's definitely happening to
Hmm.
underage individuals. But and that was kind of before I realized that we were having such a problem here in the United States, and we did have a problem. That then it just wasn't talked about it as open.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I remember when, the commercialization of sex over there as a tourism, almost like a tourism industry kind of came out in the media, and we started hearing more about it and documentaries were being made about it. And I just remember my shock at some of the video that I saw, like, just going up to a house and mom being like, "Yeah, you can have her for the day for this." I mean, you're talking about desperate people, where $9 for a day for them could, you know, I don't know what maybe feed them for a week. I don't know. I mean, but we're talking about a significant, and I'm just thinking as a mother myself, what a heartbreaker, breaking position to have to be in. And, you know, the demand aspect goes back to this as well. And I kind of want to save that till the end because I've got my 2 cents that I want to put into it as well. But it's a chunk and I want to talk about it. So save that a little bit to the end. Um, but yeah, when you were over there, were you dealing with sex trafficking mainly or labor trafficking, both? Had you heard any inklings about organ trafficking over in the area at all?
Great question. So I think primarily the focus was on sex trafficking. I think labor
Mm,
trafficking was very prevalent. I think sometimes it's challenging to focus on labor trafficking, especially internationally, depending on some of those host countries' laws around the difference between trafficking and labor violations. And that also goes for the United States. So I
yeah.
think, and I also think from the role that I specifically held in investigating some of these crimes, sometimes I would play a role of an undercover individual. And so, as a kind of
Mm-hmm.
as a Western tourist, a Western
Yeah.
buyer, and so it was easier for me to be able to play that role and investigate commercial sex crimes easier than it was labor trafficking crimes.
Right. Right.
Um, in regards to your other questions, in regards to other types of trafficking, I did not get involved in organ trafficking, but I did get involved in child sacrifice. That's a whole different, maybe a different show. And I think I will really touch on that because I'm sure some of the viewers and listeners are like, wow, child sacrifice. Um, that was a kind of a rare case in Central Africa, or cases in Central Africa, of where it is a traditional tribal belief. It is no longer practiced typically by local indigenous people to
Mm,
Central Africa. However, individuals, foreigners, typically from the Middle East, Asia, and some Western countries that are going there to invest, develop, build places,
yeah.
believe in the local folklore superstition, and so will engage or request the sacrifice of a child at like a construction site or for harvest or anything like that. And so I will have to say I was really shocked to think this was going on today in modern times. I didn't really think that this was real
Yeah.
until I actually had the opportunity to go there and work with a shelter, some shelters that were dealing with this, working with the law enforcement. And so you kind of have this weird or unusual thing where you have traditional beliefs that are no longer practiced by indigenous communities because just through education and understanding that just was a practice of harm. However, you have kind of this modern day factor in there of individuals from outside of that community coming in there and creating a demand by requesting some of these traditional practices.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, you know, because you and another gal who I've spoken with who will be on next month with an organization called Lantern Rescue. And they're doing rescues throughout the globe. And they're based here in the US. And we were speaking about, and she was dealing with adults who were sacrificed. Um, and I was asking her a little bit about it, and she said, "Yeah, it's all demand driven. They're not gonna snatch somebody and then go like and try and sell their liver or their heart.
Right.
It's all because somebody wants something,
Mhm.
and so they're gonna get it for that specific purpose and ritual." And yeah, it's unfortunate that that still happens today. And it was something that when I started poking around this whole nest of human trafficking, I didn't, I mean, I had heard about things, you know, different types of sacrificial rituals that were done because I lived in East Africa for a while in the 90s. But yeah, it was definitely a surprise that it was something that was going up now. Thank you, Carmel, for reminding me. I should put up my trigger warning because I mean
Mm.
we're talking about human trafficking and everything else. Um, I am so sorry I didn't get that up earlier. Um, so you were doing doing this kind of work for a while. Actually, can I ask you a question that swirls off totally into this direction? But I mean, I've always wanted to ask somebody in your position this. How do you deal? doing undercover type work that you were doing in Southeast Asia, how do you deal with those feelings of just like, wanting to throttle the person who's, facilitating this situation with you? How do you keep your cool about that? And how do you deal with all the feelings around that?
Yeah, well, I think the first and probably the most important thing is really taking care of your mental health. Therapy, having specific healthy outlets to help deal with some of the residual or secondary trauma that you experience in there and some of the
Mhm.
feelings and emotions that you have. And so um, I will say that I probably didn't do the best. And I think a lot of those that have come from law enforcement and military, we think that we're tough and invincible, and we don't always think about that going into some of those situations. And so I think what I really like to highlight, because I think it does cause, that sacrifice there does cause a lot of harm to
Yeah.
that individual, sometimes could relate into substance abuse, mental health issues, marriage, relationship issues. And I think I've, experienced some of those. And so again, to answer your question, I think it's really important just to make sure that you're taking care of your mental health, as it is in other similar law enforcement or service provider positions where you're
Yeah.
dealing with some of that. Yeah, I think also from my perspective, I've heard from a number of individuals that kind of work in, especially sexual crimes, sexual exploitation crimes, is oftentimes you play a role of sometimes a buyer. And
Hmm.
so I think a lot of times you deal with the guilt of having to play that role. Again, I don't know how individuals and people out there have a conscience to go and to be able to buy and use somebody, but even playing that role and not actually going through that, there's a lot of guilt in there. There's a lot where you can, when you look into the eyes of someone that you're actually trying to assist and help, and you can see that fear, you can see that worry, you can feel them shake as they're nervous around you. And so, I think those are the types of things that just kind of really sit with you in the job that you're trying to do, because you don't always get
Wow.
that opportunity
Yeah.
to go back and say, hey, I was actually there trying to help you. Or there are people out there that, are doing their best efforts to try to really, rectify and get individuals out of those situations.
So you're not always there for all that follow through as to when they might be taken into to safe custody.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I never even thought about that aspect of, and I've seen some of the documentaries, so I know what you're talking about. And that sometimes that the victim who's being trafficked is right there. Um,
Mhm.
and which I don't know, I never thought about how it would be, right? I mean, it's just, like we say, it was something that came out of nowhere, but it certainly came from other countries that this was happening and that this was a problem. And I think because we were recognizing child abuse as a thing, and we were finally willing to open our eyes to child abuse here, but child abuse tourism, people actually trafficking people, that must happen somewhere else, right? Well, it's not going to be in the US. But as you found out, it's pretty damn prevalent here, right?
Sure is. Yeah, I feel like, I spent a good probably about 6 years or so traveling all over the world, Central Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, really working on the issue of human trafficking from all kinds of perspectives, from capacity building, from training to intelligence gathering,
Hmm.
to helping bring equipment and technology and tools to different places. And I was really surprised, kind of, unfortunately, sometimes working those roles you get hurt. I was hurt on the job, and so came back to the States and kind of found a better capacity, a better role with what I have now today with Truckers Against Trafficking, or TAD, as a training specialist. But was just shocked and surprised that, as coming back to the United States, getting involved with law enforcement here and working on this issue, that how prevalent it was, how this has really always existed. And I always like to give a great example. We work with
Hmm.
the trucking and truck stop industry quite a bit. We provide free training, both in person and virtual, do a number of different things with some of the larger truck stop corporations out there, companies out there. And as I'm giving these trainings, I always like to talk about my mom worked at a truck stop. When I was young and in diapers, it was the late 70s, early 80s. And of course, that was the job that kind of was getting her through school and college. But when she was working at that truck stop, she actually had a playpen in the back. I was sitting there behind the register.
Mhm.
But I asked her, it's like, did you ever see any of this kind of stuff going on when you worked at the truck stop? And she said, well, yeah, I mean, we would see the girls that would come through, and they would, knock on the cabs of the windows. Sometimes they would come in and use the bathroom, and they would kind of be on their way. And, we'd never really told them, shoot them off the lot. We never really said anything. We just kind of thought this was normalized, that this was acceptable. And even though it was, the early 80s, and this is aging me here, the reality is that, yeah, that is human trafficking. And more than likely, statistics show,
Yeah.
as we've heard from survivors, even survivors from that time period, that they were forced to do that. We had a survivor on our staff. Unfortunately, she passed away a couple years ago, but Beth Jacobs was, a huge advocate for survivors of human trafficking, and her exploitation happened when she was, 13 years old. She was lured out of a bar, out of establishment there, and then spent the next 10 years of her life trafficked across the roadways across of America, underage, at these truck stops, at these rest stops, and no one said anything. They just thought, well, that is just what happens. That's what just happens at these locations, and no one ever
Sex
really helped
workers
her.
doing their job, right?
Yeah.
Because we didn't think about it as anything other than
Prostitution.
prostitution,
Right.
other than sex workers. And
Mhm.
whatever their reason was for getting into it, bad choices, just bad lack of choices, whatever, that was still their business, right? And we still almost viewed it like a choice.
Right. And what we've come to learn today, and from hearing survivors, from listening to them, especially because I feel like law enforcement, and I didn't participate, but I've heard from traditionally law enforcement wasn't listening to some of those survivors, and sadly to say, you know, there are often times where law enforcement was engaging in commercial sex. In male dominated industries like the military, law enforcement, trucking industry, there is a higher prevalence of individuals that are engaging in commercial sex, even those that worked in law enforcement. And so, again, I
Mhm.
think even from the perspective of law enforcement, they really didn't look at this as a crime. They just looked at this as normalized behavior that has always existed. We have these sayings and terms that, prostitution is the oldest profession, and that's really not the case. I mean, if we look historically, it was probably even worse back in the days in regards to exploitation. But, again, as we've heard from survivors, we know that statistics show that the majority of them are not there by choice, or, it's often a choice of, how do they, put food on the table that night or have shelter.
Right, exactly. Between life and death, so all those choices you make for survival. Um, yeah, it's 100% true in regards to law enforcement. And we just had somebody on from law enforcement in Central Texas a couple of weeks ago, and he's with an anti-trafficking task force. But he was speaking to us about how his he had a paradigm shift when he got uh chosen to be part of this task force. He then had the trauma informed education, then had the a vague understanding after being in law enforcement for, I don't know, 8 years, something at that point in time, as to what human trafficking was. But then having that trauma informed education, he said he really did. He started looking back at all the prostitutes and drug addicts who he had come in contact with over the years, and he said he never looks at anybody who, I mean, his calls are different now, but
Mhm.
and just in terms of speaking with his colleagues or speaking with people from other law enforcement communities, just kind of passing that message along about looking at each person really as a person, and not just, well, I'm just here to bust another druggie.
Right.
Um, and when we start seeing those types of patterns, and we've talked about sexploitation. We've had somebody on who was a survivor, who had worked a strip. Um, Talk to us a little about sexual exploitation within the transportation industry. And if you can tart, if you can tart, if you can start by just telling us how long TAT has been around and just kind of like a little bit about how they were started.
Yeah, so that's going on, I think, 16, 17 years. They started as a grassroots organization where kind of actually the mother of the founder of the organization and deputy director, they actually had a restaurant that was connected to a motel hotel that truckers would stop at all the time in Texas. And so they actually started it as a kind of a small faith-based kind of Bible study, bringing awareness to the truckers that were stopping there about the issue of human trafficking, commercial sex, kind of keeping their eyes open as they're out on the road, for some of those missing
Yeah.
individuals. And it's really grown. I will have to say, now we're a international organization. We have organizations like Amazon and Uber and Walmart, donating, training employees, UPS. We have
Amazing.
law enforcement. We have now, I think it's 12 or 14 states that mandated that you get human trafficking training in order to get your commercial driver's license. And so
Wow, you're
when you think
kidding me.
yeah. So when you think about systems change, when you think about the transportation industry, we are very grateful and thankful that this industry, probably more than any of the other industries, has really jumped on and said, we know
Yeah.
this has existed. We don't want this to exist. We want to change this behavior going forward. We want to get rid of some of those older beliefs, the older generation and mentality where they thought this was acceptable and engaged it. And so when I say we have presidents of like the American Trucking Association or state trucking associations
Mhm.
hosting us at events, getting this message out and really kind of talking about the resources that are out there, we have seen a change within the industry. We are seeing what we call systems change of really now looking at this industry is no longer kind of that shady industry that's participating, but really a leader in industries out there of this kind of army and eyes and ears out there that are out on our roads every day, keeping the country running, but they're also viewing and seeing, they're vigilant and they're seeing this taking place and they can report it to law enforcement, they can report it to hotlines. And so over the years with Truckers Against Trafficking, I think we started in the kind of long haul truckers, but we're
Mhm.
encompassing school districts, so your school bus drivers who often don't get the training as the teachers and counselors do, your ride share, your rail and train, just the freight, your in-home delivery. You don't always have to go. You can just be in your own community, and maybe you're delivering washer and dryers or furniture, and you're going in people's houses and you're seeing maybe these indicators that we show in our training that commercial sex or forced labor might be taking place. And so I probably can go on forever in regards to our organization, but really the concept is just providing free training and resources to the industry frontline workers, either those that work within the industry or those everyday individuals that are utilizing our transportation system. So driving your car, stopping at a gas station, riding a bus, getting on a plane. We really all have a part that we can play as it relates to combating human trafficking and identifying things. And the reality is that this is happening in plain sight. We just created a new educational video that's about 15 minutes that really talks about how it's just happening in plain sight. And I think we get busy throughout our days, going to the grocery store, dropping off the kids at practice, getting to work, whatever it may be, fueling up our car, but we don't take a few minutes to maybe look around and say, well, that seems a little off. Or why is this young individual dressed kind of scandalous or inappropriate for the weather today? They seem to be approaching individuals. What's kind of going on there? And really kind of taking a second look and seeing, well, gosh, that doesn't seem right. What can I do about it? Do I just make a simple tip, into a hotline? Do I let management know of that location? But again, really the concept is to empower the transportation logistics industries, and using that force to combat such a large crime.
I think it is just amazing and wonderful and commendable that TAT has been able to grow from starting with, hey, let's spread the word amongst a few long haul truckers, and from just the trucking industry in general to encompassing the larger transportation industry. And I'm so glad that you named some of those different positions, because I I don't think we think about the person who's, delivering to all the produce to all the restaurants, and maybe what they might see. Or yeah, that bus driver who is seeing the same kids, or if they're a public bus driver, seeing the same people. Um, Couple of questions. One, I know that the typical thought that I have is truck stop, long haul truckers in for the night, girls coming into the area and knocking on the cabs. Through just the people that I know who are either truckers themselves or kind of in law enforcement or whatever, do feel that there has been a significant decrease in that, in the larger truck stops around the country. The smaller ones that are on the back roads or whatever, not everyone has a great handle on it, but the larger ones that are really have been utilized heavily in the past. Has Tat seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. All the way. Um, we just have so many great examples that I'd love to share. We have seen that. We've
Please.
seen, yeah, so we have what we call our Heritage Hub Award winner every year. We get, we hear stories of where frontline workers have either made a call on behalf of a potential victim that has led to their recovery or their liberation, or led to the arrest of a trafficker. And so we have numerous accounts. So they're on our website if people ever want to check it out at tatnonprofit.org. But you can see our past Heritage Hub Award winners, and most of them are truck stop employees. Some of them are drivers. But when you think about it, we used to see these stickers. They were very derogatory. They were in the shape of a lizard, but kind of looked like a woman. And it used to say no
Yep.
lot lizards.
Yep, I've seen them.
And so, some of these big truck stop chains used to sell those. They got rid of those. They actually now have our stickers for free that actually says, do you need help? And has the hotline number on there. But that's the kind of mentality and change that we're looking to see within the trucking industry and the transportation industry. When we have, drivers that are trained, whether it be a single driver that owns his own truck or a driver that works for a company that has tens of thousands of drivers out there, when they now get a knock on the cab, and instead of either engaging or telling that person to go away, they have a different response of, hey,
Mhm.
is there somebody I can call for you? Or, it doesn't seem like you want to be here. Can we get you some help? It doesn't always have to be law enforcement. It could be a service provider, local, local organizations there. But what I really want to, convey to viewers and listeners is that we've really seen the transportation industry take this full-hearted and really make a difference.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like they're really kind of leading the way for other industries to get involved. I think this is a model replication that could be used in other areas and other industries. We've really seen expansion specifically in the energy industry. When you think about, all those individuals that keeping our lights on, that has the electricity for us to have this podcast today, that is all individuals that are going out in communities, either their own communities or traveling to other areas, and extracting, refining, transporting, the logistics and some of those energy aspects. And so, anywhere along that supply chain, anywhere along that process from where we extract it to where we're able to have this conversation today, there are individuals that can, just simply be informed and be empowered to view something at their everyday job, or outside of that, to be able to see something and actually say something, take action.
100% replicatable. Is that a word? Is that the right word? Because I'm thinking, I know that a lot of airline industries have their own programs with human trafficking, so I'm thinking about the transportation industry, but I'm also thinking about a conversation I had about a month ago with somebody in Canada who's tackling their hospitality industry up
Mhm.
there.
Yeah.
And so, she's on a mission with her organization to convention centers and everything from exploitation, sexual exploitation to labor exploitation, to watching their um, where they're getting their products from, the economic stream. So I think that it's 100% right, because if we had leaders in our different industries, particularly, those that are customer facing, right, that we have
Mhm.
some interaction with somebody who might be a trafficker, who might be a survivor, victim themselves. And for somebody, let's just say somebody who is in a truck stop or in a diner, or even if they're out somewhere, if they think they see something, what should they do?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think that's always, I think with all the information and awareness and resources we have, I think that's one of the biggest things that people are like, what should I do? And I would say that please don't do anything. Please do something, please
Mhm.
say something. And so that can look like a variety of things based on the circumstances. It may be in a situation where it might be safe if that individual seems to be appeared alone and there doesn't, maybe it might be just, asking that individual, how you doing today? Are you okay? Can I call anybody for you? Sometimes it just may be, somebody that's compassionate and caring. That might be enough for someone that's experiencing that exploitation to say, yeah, can you call this person for me? Or I don't want to deal with the police, but can you call me a shelter or something like that? You
Right,
know,
right.
it may be a circumstance where you're not too sure. And so this is what I really want to convey to everybody watching is there are apps. We have an app for Android and iPhone that you can download that you can make a tip anonymously. And we've partnered with both state hotlines and the national hotline to have that information go directly. So, if you're in a gas station or a rest stop and you see something a little unusual, simply, getting on there on your phone and typing in there, on this day at this time, I saw these two individuals in this vehicle with this color dressed this way, and send it off. And that may not be a whole lot, but what we do see and what we often hear is that someone, 50 miles down the road at a different gas station also made a tip. And so that type of information is what's helpful for law
Yeah.
enforcement to gather that information to pursue or go back. Or someone makes a tip and law enforcement may not be able to respond right away, but maybe they get another tip and they're like, okay, well, we need to go to this location. We need to, maybe pull surveillance, see if we can gather some more information.
Mm,
What I really encourage people to do again is to at least do something. Let
mhm.
management know, hey, there's somebody out here hanging out by, the pumps, or maybe they're begging for change, or, because sometimes that's an opening. Just letting them know. Maybe the manager, there's a protocol at that location that says this is how we deal with it. We have the right tools and resources to get this individual some help. And so I think it's really situation dependent, but I feel like if you're having this sixth sense, if you're having this gut feeling, most likely
Yeah.
that you're typically right. People are typically right when they have those feelings. And so I encourage people just to do something, even if you call law enforcement and it may not turn out to be anything. I think having that information is at least something that they can go by. And I will say, for working in this space for a while, when people have been wrong, when individuals have made a phone call and law enforcement show up and there's a parent or aunt or uncle and law enforcement stops them and questions them and that child, they've always been, I'm so glad someone called. I don't think anybody feels inconvenienced because someone was concerned about the safety of that child that they're with. More than likely, they're like, I'm glad that there's somebody in the community that cares and was double checking. And so, again, to answer your question, you know, there's a number of different things that you can do, but I just really encourage that you do something.
I think that last situation that you said, when it involves a child, because I think that that's like the most difficult situation,
Mhm.
it personally, because they're not necessarily articulating the child, their desire not to go with that person, in terms of saying, like, this isn't my mom or dad, or and so you're kind of like, well, what's the relationship here? Is the child just being difficult and having a bratty moment? You don't
Right.
know.
Yeah.
And some people are a little rougher with their kids than others. And so where does that line, where does it cross on that line where you're like, okay, whether they're their own kid or not, something else may be going on here and I've got to call, so I think people, even though we want to protect kids so much, it's almost a more difficult situation than I think it was easier to read adults' faces when they have some expression when they're trying to convey something if they haven't like totally
Mhm.
just, shut it off. Um, so it's good news that people in general have responded positively to somebody coming out and questioning, hey, what was going on?
Mhm.
And I guess if they don't, then that it says something more about them, or maybe so that something else is going on, right? That the
Right.
police need to kind of look into, which could be the case as well. So tell us, Louis, a little bit about what do you do as kind of a day-to-day basis as your role with as a training coordinator? I know we spoke that you've gotten some time at home and you're going to be on the road a lot. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I'm a training specialist with TAD, or Truckers Against Trafficking. I feel like I wear many hats. Um, So primarily my role, at least in the last couple of years, is focusing in a couple areas. One with our truck stops and travel centers. We've seemed to notice working within the transportation industry that out of all the different sectors within transportation, our travel centers and truck stop employees probably see potential trafficking more than any other. And so, we're really looking at how can we create training that resonates and applies to that specific workforce that again is they're 24/7. They were open through COVID. They're open 20
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of the night. And I think, let's be honest, I mean, we all have kind of in the back of our minds, truck stops can be fairly rough places, challenging, and so it is sometimes a challenging workplace. And so I've really been spending a lot of time in just trying to have information posters that go up in the restrooms that are victim centered, so potential
Mm,
victims can see those. So really kind
yeah.
of focusing on that. There's also a number of different human trafficking task forces across North America, anywhere from you know human trafficking task forces that are heavy government law enforcement under Attorney General's office to maybe a group of faith-based nuns at the local Catholic church. They all have a role, and they all really have some impact in the communities that they work with. And so finding different ways to support the work that they have, whether it be hanging up posters at bus terminals or coming and speaking at an event, or again collaborating in some other way. And then I also do a little bit with some of our law enforcement. If I didn't mention, TAT does provide free training and resources for the commercial vehicle enforcement industry. So your port of entries, your
Oh,
state highway patrols, oftentimes law
wow.
enforcement, especially kind of your patrol, you're on the road, police don't get human trafficking training. And so we do provide that free to those agencies. So they are equipped on when they're pulling somebody over, they get that phone call at the truck stop, how to handle it, how to have a victim centered approach, and really to look for some of those key indicators.
Yeah, we were speaking about this with our friend Gabe, who's from law enforcement, about how little there really is in the police academy
Mhm.
from either human trafficking training in general or anything on being victim centered, right?
All right.
Approaching the people who you're interacting with on a more victim centered avenue. Um, we're creeping up on 7 o'clock here, but I'll save my last chunk for last. And I did watch the video,
Oh,
and
fantastic.
I was impressed. I watched several of them, and so guys, we put up the website earlier, but there it is again, in case you guys are interested. They have a lot of training videos on there. And just in case you're ever curious or wondering about, you know, what type of training do certain industries receive? What are they on the lookout for? I know I was curious. I'm like, what do you tell a delivery driver to be on the lookout for? Um, let's have Louis answer that. What do you tell a delivery driver to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so I think some of those indicators, say for instance, a delivery driver may be out in a community, and maybe they're seeing an individual, who might be, say it's a cold, snowy day, and maybe they're dressed in high heels and a really revealing skirt or something like that. It just seems out of place there. Sometimes, we see drivers or frontline employees at truck stops where they're asking for an individual and that person isn't in control of their own ID or driver's license. Maybe someone else that they're with is speaking for them. So if you're asking how their day is going, they don't really speak. Maybe they put their head down. Sometimes you can see outward visible signs of abuse, physical abuse, bruising, red marks, cuts, things like that. Oftentimes, traffickers and buyers are extremely physically abusive to individuals in that as well too. So, those are just some. One doesn't necessarily mean that there's human trafficking. If we're starting to see maybe a few of these indicators, that might be an opportunity to, maybe ask that person. I think sometimes, if we're just really good human beings and we ask an individual, especially those individuals that are experiencing this exploitation, they don't get too many people that come up and treat them very well. And so that usually is an opening and an opportunity for someone to escape the life, to get out of that.
Yeah, just seeing kindness for maybe the first time in months or years.
Yeah.
So
You
it's so
know,
heartbreaking.
and then, of course, I know, especially with our time here, I didn't mention probably one of my other roles that I probably really like is working with our addressing demand or our man-to-man campaign. As an individual, as an organization, we realize that we
Yep.
can't combat human trafficking if we do not tackle the demand on the front end. And I think from someone who's worked in this space for a while, especially from a law enforcement capacity, we can pull out as many women, children, boys, girls, individuals out of human trafficking situation. We can arrest as many traffickers. But if we don't change the mentality, if we don't stop the demand aspect, then we're just kind of running in circles. And so what we
Yeah.
really have to do, and what I didn't know, as a male growing up, I think my dad did a really good job raising me, but to what extent, and same thing here. And so I didn't realize growing up the harms of engaging in commercial sex, the harms of looking at pornography, the harms of going to a strip club. But these are all the types of behaviors and mentalities that normalize the commercial sex industry, that normalize purchasing another human being, whether for sex or for labor or anything else like that. And so
Yeah.
the purposes of that program and the resources in there is just to have the conversation, not only among men, but as human beings, among all of us, about what's appropriate, how we treat each other, and really kind of getting away from that normalized belief that we can go and engage in commercial sex, that we can look at pornography and think it has no harm, but in reality, there's individuals being exploited on the other end. That going to a strip club again is entertaining that mentality of that this is okay in regards to how we treat each other. And so
Mhm.
out of all the work that we do, I think it's all important, but I really do think that if we're going to make huge, significant change in stopping human exploitation, we really need to talk to everybody, especially our youth, the next generation coming up, and really not engaging in these types of behaviors. And what
Yeah.
is probably challenging for a lot of folks out here, especially those that are parents, I'm a father to a young daughter, is having the conversations, because if we don't have these conversations with our youth, they're going to get it from online and the internet. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the exploitation happen, which leads to these individuals being out in our transportation systems. But that's where they're getting the impression. And so if they're viewing and seeing things in there that's influencing them, that this is what you should be doing, this is how you should be acting, these are the types of relationships you have, a lot of it could be pretty negative. And so I think we need to do a more concerted effort in regards to having this conversation and really informing people about these acts that have so much consequence and so much harm that we just didn't realize before. We just didn't think
Yeah.
that was happening. And so I think that was when we talked about the beginning, starting with the aha moments. I think if anything, in working in the space of human trafficking, we really need to focus on the demand, and it's having
Yeah.
that conversation on the front end. And what I feel like this is so powerful within industries that are typically male dominated or traditionally male dominated is that again, if we can have this conversation, especially there, then I think that's where we can minimize, the impact and harm in regards to human trafficking. There's a number of different ways we do that. The conversation. Another tool that we use is some companies put it in their company handbook that the individuals cannot engage in purchasing commercial sex on company time or with company assets. And so, although that may seem kind of unusual for a lot of people, yeah, but
It's common sense,
yeah.
but it's just
But again, if you think of that from the perspective, well, one, it protects that company, but two, it really sets
exactly
this mentality that people are like, oh, well, this isn't a good thing. Why isn't this a good
right.
thing? Yeah, okay, maybe I shouldn't engage in that. And again, getting that change, that system change, really informing each other, having conversations like we are tonight. That's where we're going to see the impact. That's where we're going to really help this message tonight spread further to other people out there about, let's not engage in that. And I think from me, especially being in the military and law enforcement, there's those times when you had those time off where like, the guys are like, well, what are you doing on a Friday night? People are like, well, let's go to the strip club, or let's do this, or let's go out and do this. And I feel like this is an opportunity for us to be bold and stand up and say, hey, let's not engage in this type of activity because this is the harm that's causing. Let's find some other type of activity that we can do and engage in and get involved in.
We speak a lot here about the importance of educating our kids on these different subjects. And, particularly because I have a teenage son myself who, I've had many, many conversations with. And it's heartbreaking to see, what's out there on the internet. Gen Z is a generation that's been raised with technology, raised with smartphones. They've had porn at the tip of their fingertips since they could, click an icon.
Mm.
And the more we're able to speak about these topics to them, you know, they're the next generation of workers. They're the next generation of fathers and mothers, and
Mm.
um, what kind of message do we want to be sending down to them? And I think it's so critical, the work that you're doing with the adult men, because regardless of what people think about gender or gender roles, it's I think it's a pretty well-known fact that, most kids emulate their mom or their dad. If they're a boy, they emulate their dad. And there's just something about that. But I would say, regardless, just if you're a father, how you speak about people, and I'll use the people instead of women, but how you speak about people, how you speak about pornography, how you, what you do have to say. Do you talk to them at all, or is this not something? Do you know that Dad's got a stash of Playboy under his bed, or whatever the situation is? How helping to change that, if we can get through to some of those people who may not have been putting forth the best positive example for their kids in that particular area. And if they're able to change, and if they're able to then start having those conversations with their kids, wow, what a difference.
Mm-hmm.
What have you run some of those trainings, the man-on-man trainings yourself?
Yeah, I sure have. I would say that I've had the opportunity to give that presentation, to play that video in a group setting, to have discussions and dialogues. Out of all the topics that I talk, or presentations or niches, that one's probably that gets the most emotion involved. The audience really gets involved. People have their thoughts and opinions on that, and I think it is a real activator. I think I think I like having those, even though sometimes those conversations can get a little heated. But I think that's what we need to do. I think we need to have these tough conversations in regards to
Yeah.
identifying what's the best way to how we can treat each other and stop, repeating some of these cycles of abuse that we've done for generations.
Well, if we don't challenge our norms, if we don't ask those tough questions of ourselves or of others, we're never going to evolve or move forward with those
Mhm.
things. And after watching your video on this, which is available on the website, by the way, guys, I can see there were two or three points during it. I could see them being aha moments for people, if they were kind of going through this. It's like, okay, yeah, we've done this piece. Okay, we've done this piece. Oh, now you're putting those two pieces together. Wait a minute. Now I'm kind of thinking about this in a different perspective. Um, and it sounds like you've been in the room when that's happened before.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's gotta be that's gotta be pretty powerful to realize that you've helped bring about, at least for that moment, a little bit of a shift in how that person sees things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very powerful tool. We've had that used, or it's being used in biodiversion programs. So for people that are watching, those are typically court mandated programs that individuals that have either been arrested, convicted, or being charged of purchasing commercial sex are required to attend. Um, and so sometimes we play that video, or that video is played within that program there, and I think it's been very powerful. We've heard some feedback that individuals sometimes that are arrested for purchasing commercial sex, for engaging in buying, don't understand that. I think, well, it's just against the law. But I think what's helpful
Yeah.
about that tool in that video, it helps them understand why this is illegal, what's happening in
Mhm.
their behaviors, and the real harm that it causes to that individual that they purchase, to the community, to their own lives, to their own families. And so I think what's helpful about that tool is helping people realize the why behind, you know, why people think it's bad to engage in commercial sex, not just because it's against the law. And I know there's different forms in regards to how people feel in regards to legalizing commercial sex, but really trying to understand the type of behaviors, the mentality of purchasing
Mhm.
another individual, and where that comes from, and how the harm that comes from that.
Yeah. It's so incredibly important. Louis, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We could certainly talk for hours about different things that you've done and pieces of training that you've done, and who knows, again, maybe we'll have you back with some of those things that we've spoken about. But I know you're so busy, and thank you so much for taking this time with us tonight. Guys, TAT, it's such an incredible organization. I encourage you, check out the website. It's tatnonprofit.org. I'll put it up one more time. It is in the video description, along with some other contact information, so you can find that after the show. And again, Louis, I will definitely be following up in an email with you. I won't make you sit through my entire outro song, but thank you so much from the entire Sassy community.
Yeah,
Really
absolutely.
appreciate you being here.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye.
Well, guys, that was Mr. Louie Greek with Truckers Against Trafficking, TAT, just a fabulous organization. I heard it started. I did not hear that story about exactly how it started, about being a motel attached to a restaurant or whatever their situation was, and just kind of started passing the word. Amazing, amazing. And this is what it's turned into, an international organization. So uh, just fabulous. So that's all I have to say for right now. But we do have our very first quote unquote sassy chat time coming up on Saturday. And the reason I said quote is because the name is still under construction. All right, we're going to finalize it. Excuse me. Excuse me. Probably after tomorrow Saturday's show, we'll be finalizing the name for that. What do I have planned? I haven't really, I don't know. We just decided to do this. We decided to have a chat time. I do have some things that I could show you, some things that have happened lately around here that I think you might find a little entertaining or might have something to say about it. And I got a few stories I've been holding on to that I've gathered through the week that have happened. So got a few things to share. Hopefully, we'll have an update at that time from Crystal. If anybody has an update from Misha by Saturday, just in kind of how she's doing, and how she's handling things. I know she had said that the tears were kind of still at bay last time that I had seen a post, I think, from her. Uh, but we know that sometimes that wall will come down at the most inconvenient times, most unsuspecting times. So I'm wishing her well, wishing Crystal a speedy recovery, wishing her well, and anybody else out there who needs hugs and love. Kamal, if you're still on, are you home? Because you said you were going to be heading home. So I hope that you are home and that you are doing well. So thank you everybody for being here today. I can't wait to talk to you guys on Saturday. Bring your thoughts, bring your ideas. I just brought this up and you guys wanted to run with it. So, hey, we could make a craft hour for all I care, right? Let's just, maybe this is the one, last Saturday I kind of bring you stuff and I haven't normally had somebody on. I like having somebody on, but if you guys want to be part of uh Saturday's chat time, maybe I'll just throw the link up and people can kind of come up and chat as well. So yes, you are home. Oh, good. Great. Thank you, Carmel. Thank you for confirming that. So we'll see. It's going to be a free for all on Saturday and I can't wait. So with that, I'm wishing you all well. Please remember, you are worthy, you are valuable, and you are loved just the way you are for who you are. Hugs and love from me. I will see you guys Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Surviving together, never alone. Enjoy the outro, guys. Got to take the banner off first. Hang on. Get our other one up. There we go.
Through the fire, through the rain, we have walked through endless pain, but we stand, we rise again, stronger now, we break the chain, surviving together, hearts open wide, lifting each other through every tide. The past may have shaped us, but it won't define. Together we heal, together we shine. Every tear, every scar tells the story of who we are. Not just survivors, but warriors too. With love as our armor, we see this through. We see you, we hear you, and we believe in you. Surviving together, hearts open wide, lifting each other through every tide. The past may have shaped us, but it won't define. Together we heal, together we shine. We see you, we hear